The year of 2020 in Formula 1 has sprung up a few surprises when it comes to circuits, hasn't it? We've returned to the likes of Imola and Istanbul Park and even raced around the crazy Bahrain Short. It's not an oval. And this got me thinking, what are the 5 strangest circuits F1 has ever raced at? Well, as if by magic, here they are. AVIS. Undoubtedly, AVIS is one of the weirdest racetracks in F1 history. The 8.3km circuit was essentially 2 long straights with a hairpin at each end and resembled more of a dual carriageway than a racetrack. The original layout was a staggering 19 kilometres long, but shortened several times and ended up being 8.3 kilometres for the 1959 Grand Prix. It featured very steep banking on the north curve from the 1930s up until 1967, and is often hailed as one of the most dangerous circuits in the world. At the time of the 1959 German Grand Prix, it was the fastest on record, with an average speed of 143.3 miles per hour. From 1961 onwards, however, F1 no longer raced at circuits with bankings as they were deemed too dangerous. Today, AVIS is an abandoned and forgotten racetrack of the past. It held a big send-off race in 1999, but now the tower and offices are used as a motel. Nurburgring Nordschleife. The Nordschleife became the main host of the German Grand Prix, apart from the 1959 season in which AVIS hosted. The track was used between 1927 and 1982 and measured a mind-blowing 22.835 kilometres and had 160 corners. You heard me right, 160. With F1 cars being forever modified to make them quicker, the track began to become more and more dangerous to race on. In 1967, a chicane was added before the start-finish straight, and 3 years later in 1970, the race was boycotted as it was seen to be too dangerous. A fatal crash at Zandvoort that year led to drivers demanding changes were made to the Nordschleife, but these were not possible in the time frame, and so the race was moved to the safer Hockenheimring. Following the demands of drivers, Armco barriers were added to the track and the track surface smoothed out and bumps removed. However, despite making these changes and going on to host more Grand Prix at the iconic venue, it was decided that racing at the venue was just too expensive and dangerous. The number of marshals needed to safely run the event was more than 5 times a standard racetrack. Most notably, Niki Lauda, who was the reigning champion at the time, tried to convince his colleagues to boycott the event in 1976. He didn't like the idea of racing around such long circuits with so many variable weather conditions. His calls were ignored and the race went ahead. During that race, Lauda was involved in his life-changing crash and badly burnt. Fortunately, he survived thanks to racing drivers who stopped on track to pull him from the wreckage, but the full Nordschleife circuit was never used again in Formula 1. Pescara. The Pescara circuit was an astonishing 25.8km racetrack in Italy, which only hosted one official F1 championship event in 1957 due to the cancellation of other races that year. It remains the longest circuit in terms of lap distance covered to host an F1 race. Being a road course, it took place throughout a number of nearby villages and made a rough triangle shape. Featuring not one, but 2 5.5km straights, the track was seen as being so dangerous that even Enzo Ferrari didn't allow his drivers to compete in the 1957 Grand Prix. Fangio, who put his Maserati on pole for the race, set a pole time of over 9 minutes. Imagine being a spectator seeing the cars every 9 minutes, and achieved an average speed of 98 miles per hour during the lap. Monza Oval. You might recognise Monza as a circuit we visit in modern day, but F1 previously raced at Monza in 1955, 1956, 1960 and 1961 as an oval with a banking. The 10km track, which included a 4.25km oval, saw both Stirling Moss and Phil Hill win 2 Grand Prix each. The oval part of the track featured a high and steep banking, and the reason for not using this track after 1961? Bankings were banned from Formula 1. During that 1961 event, however, Wolfgang von Trips was involved in a collision with Jim Clark which sent von Trips' car airborne and into the barriers, killing himself and 15 spectators. Although this accident did not happen on the actual oval part of the circuit, it was the final example for F1 to make some serious changes. Las Vegas. A rich sport like F1 and Las Vegas should go together in perfect harmony, right? Wrong. Sin City was not as glamorous as you might imagine, with a terribly boring circuit being erected in the middle of a car park. There was little to no elevation change, being in the middle of the Nevada desert, and has often been referred to as the worst circuit F1 has ever been to. The circuit design was rubbish, and being anti-clockwise put massive strains on the necks of the drivers. The length of the track was 3.65 kilometres and only held 2 races. Being in a desert too, the heat was ridiculous and dangerous for drivers. After the 1981 Caesars Palace Grand Prix, Nelson Piquet needed over 15 minutes to recover from extreme heat exhaustion and almost didn't make it to the finish line, being crowned world champion at the same event. Although being a temporary circuit, the track could be wide in places and was held in the famous Caesars Palace Hotel car park. Yes, an actual car park. Although the hotel thought hosting the 2 races in 1981 and 1982 would be financially rewarding, it in fact had the opposite effect, and they made big losses by running the event. F1 never returned after 1982, but talks of another Las Vegas Grand Prix are always being rumoured. There you have it, 5 of the strangest circuits F1 has ever raced at. Which one do you think is the weirdest? Are there any you would have included in this list? Let us know in the comment section below.